Hello there, welcome to Nick Allen's Digital Literacy Practitioners podcast, number 2. This one is entitled 4.1, assignment 4.1, the theory of reflective practice. And initially I will be tackling criteria 4.1a, explaining the purpose of reflective practice and 3 benefits of doing it, and 4.1b, what barriers and challenges there are to doing reflective practice with regard to digital literacy. The purpose of reflective practice is to look back at your teaching and evaluate it honestly, recognising strengths so that those can be repeated, and to highlight areas that can be improved. Also, to then theorise ways that this can be done, the improvements can be made, and to leading to action planning to put the improvements into practice. 3 benefits of reflective practice. 1, reflective practice is a way in which you can formalise what is a natural internal process anyway. I think human beings, it's in their nature, it's definitely in the nature of teachers, but in the nature of human beings to look back at what you just did and to reflect on it, to think about it. But the reflective practice is a way of formalising that so that it can be sort of acknowledged and recorded for future use. So it becomes a practical exercise, and doing that as part of a formal process basically sort of enforces you to ring fence the time to give your practice the quality of reflection that it needs in order to get better at what you're doing. So number 1, it formalises a natural inclination and creates time to improve the quality of your reflection. Second benefit is to consider your practice in the light of other information, for example, theory from other practitioners, and how that informs what you've done and what you can do, and also in the light of feedback from your own learners, potentially from your peers too. So second benefit is to consider theory and consider your own practice in the light of that theory and how the 2 things can be combined together. The third benefit clearly is in identifying ways to improve your practice. I think that's probably the most important aspect of reflective practice. Okay, 4.1b, what are the barriers or the challenges to reflective practice? First and foremost, probably the most obvious one is the time. When do I do this reflective practice? Where do I find the time, and how do I find enough time to do it justice? The reflective practice is always best when it's located as soon as possible after the practice that you're trying to reflect on. But of course, timetables and teaching commitments don't always allow that to happen in a timely way. Straight after your lesson, you'll be busy with a 1,000 things, including gathering up errant bits of paper, handouts left, pencils, pens, cups of coffee, talking to students who have lingered behind asking you about something, etc., etc. The list goes on. But if you as soon as you can do that reflective practice, the better. And of course, finding the time to sit down and do it thoughtfully, even if it's only for 15 minutes, is important, but very challenging for all teachers, because there's always something seemingly more important that needs to be done. So time is the first one. Second barrier or challenge. I'm actually going to take two things as part of one challenge, and the first of them is the first challenge is not being self-critical enough. As a PGC teacher trainer, I read lots of reflective journals, evaluations of teaching, and one of the main criticisms is that very often people aren't critical enough. They're not honest enough about their own practice, and they don't think deeply enough about what it is that needs to be improved in teaching. So that and the second part of that is the opposite of that, which I also see a lot of, which is being too critical and too negative about one's practice, and not recognising the things that are being done well, because sometimes it's little things that seem really obvious, but unless you label them, unless you recognise them and point to them, realise that they're there and that they're positive, they also are they're in danger of not being repeated because you've not realised what it is that you actually did right. So those two things are actually parts of my second challenge, which is being either not critical enough or being too critical or too negatively critical. My third challenge is where you need to try to adapt theory to your practice. So assimilating the writings or the thoughts, the theories of other practitioners or theorists, and combining that with your own practice, i.e. trying to apply that theory, trying to do that, or to try and interpret the theory imaginatively so that you can apply it to your own context in a useful way. That is a really key challenge, because very often you can read something in a book or in a journal or whatever it might be, and think, oh, that sounds right, but it's also very abstract. How can I put that into concrete terms, in terms of how I change my practice? What do I do in my practice that embodies what this theory is getting at? And that is, I think, probably the biggest challenge, or one of the biggest challenges to applying reflective practice. Okay, I'm going to go on to criteria 4.1C and D in the rest of this podcast, which are: C is identifying at least 2 models and 2 methods of reflective practice, and then justifying the selection of a particular model. So I'm going to outline or identify 2 models, 2 methods, and justify using a particular one of them. The first one I want to identify is the Brookfield model, Stephen D. Brookfield, who wrote a book called Becoming a Critically Reflective Teacher. And he talks about using 4 different critical lenses. Critical lenses is his term, through which we view our own practice and reflect on it. And those 4 lenses are our own view, and he calls that autobiography. Secondly, the view of our students. Thirdly, the view of our fellow professionals. And fourthly, the various theoretical perspectives in the literature, which I referred to earlier in this podcast. Okay, so critical lenses, using 4 critical lenses to look at our practice: our own view of our students, our fellow professionals, and theoretical perspectives, or theorists, other educational theorists. My second, actually, sorry, before I go on to my next one, I wanted to talk about the method that he used in order to sort of engage those critical, one of those critical lenses, that being the view of students. He gives his students a sort of feedback form, if you like, which has 5 kind of prompt questions on it. And in which he asks, firstly, at what moment in the class this week did you feel the most engaged with the class, and what was happening at that moment? Secondly, at what moment in the class were you feeling the most distanced or the most disengaged from what was happening? And thirdly, what action can anyone, teacher or student, did anyone, teacher or student, take this week that you found most helpful? Fourthly, what action that anyone took this week did you find most puzzling or confusing? And then fifthly, what about the class this week or today that surprised you the most? Okay, those are kind of 5 prompt questions that he used in order to engage one of those critical lenses anyway, that being of his students. My second model is the Graham-Gibbs model of critical reflection, which is very much based on the Kolb cycle, Kolb's experiential learning cycle. And there are 6 key stages in his reflective cycle, and they are as follows. The method is, first of all, the description. What happened? Okay, just simply describe what happened without making any judgments about it. So just a factual account of what occurred in your lesson. Secondly, what were your feelings? What are your reactions? Okay, you don't analyse them. You're just frank about how you felt. So, did you feel upset, frustrated? Did you feel really good? Was there excitement in the room? Whatever. So, feelings. Third stage, evaluation. What was good or bad about what happened? Making judgments, basically, about those things. The fourth stage is then analysis. How do you make sense of what happened? And at that point, you can bring in outside ideas to help you with that. So if something didn't quite go right, is there some theory that helps you to understand why it didn't go right? So you're asking yourself what really went on. Fifth stage is making conclusions. What can be concluded? And there were kind of 2 subsets to that. Firstly, what can be concluded in a general sense from your experience, and then the second sort of subset of that is what can be concluded about your own specific way of working. And then the last stage is to make a personal action plan. What are you going to do differently next time? What steps are you going to take based on your reflection, based on what you've learned, and what steps are you going to take into the future? So those 2 models were Brookfield model and his 4 critical lenses, and the Gibbs model using 6 stages of reflection. Okay, so the last criteria in this assignment 4.1 is justifying the use of one of these particular models of critical reflective practice. And I'm going to go for the Gibbs of the 2. I suppose, being honest, the first main reason for choosing it over Brookfield is because I don't have all the data available to me necessarily that Brookfield suggests that you should use or should look at in order to employ at least 2 of his critical lenses. I don't have data from my student feedback, not directly from student feedback anyway, and I also don't have very much in the way of peer feedback from fellow professionals. I do have some actually, which I will use, but the main reason for not using Brookfield's method is that I guess However, on the other hand, the Gibbs method is it's a really straightforward cycle of reflection. I think it's quite advantageous to simply describe what you did in your practice before you try to make conclusions about it. Because if you can quite dispassionately just recount what happened first of all, that kind of stops you making quick assumptions or jumping to conclusions actually about the reasons why certain things happened the way they did. I think that's a good idea to do that first of all. I think it's also a good idea to have a separate stage in which you think about your feelings, about why you were reacting or how you reacted, because I think it's important to engage with how you feel, and then so that you can put that aside and then kind of again more dispassionately make a judgment about what was good and what wasn't. I also think it also has a stage within his method that encourages you to think about ideas from outside. So the idea of is theory applicable here, or indeed in fact feedback from other people. I guess that's similar to Brookfield in that way. And importantly, once you've made your conclusions, coming up with an action plan. So what am I going to do next time? And I guess the outcome of all of that is that you have a sort of step-by-step or set of actions that you can put into practice for your next session. It occurs to me that I've been talking about reflective practice in rather a general way, about teaching practice in general, as opposed to reflecting on digital literacy learning. So I'm going to add a few points that will kind of make it a bit more directly linked to digital literacy. I think with regard to the benefits of doing reflective practice, I think it's very easy to, when trying to use a lot of new tools, techniques and technologies with digital literacy, it's very easy to try them out one after the other and not have that moment to take stock and to ask yourself honestly, did this tool, technology, technique really work for me? What are the good and the bad points of using this particular tool or technology? Particularly within the digital world, there is a fast-growing plethora of new software, tools, technologies, etc., and it can be very easy to try lots of them out very quickly without really thoroughly engaging with whether they are useful in themselves and whether you are using them in quite the right way. So reflective practice, I think, is particularly important for digital literacy practitioners, because more than just talking about teaching generally, this is a challenge that many of us are kind of just undertaking, and it would be very easy to take a very sort of ad hoc scattergun approach to the application of digital literacy within your teaching, as I say, because of the plethora of different technologies, tools, techniques, devices, platforms, etc. that are available to us. I think that point from that follows on quite nicely to what I was saying about barriers and challenges, and I mentioned time being a particular barrier or challenge, particularly in the use of digital literacy or delivering digital literacy learning. If you're doing a lot of this stuff for the first time, or you're using new tech tools and technologies, it can be very difficult to create the time to really engage with whether or not that tool, technology or technique is really useful or not. What did we really get out of using that? I think it can be really easy just to try these things out on your students and sort of almost assume that, or because it worked, as in it didn't go wrong, and because it was on a computer, it must therefore have been beneficial. And I think sometimes time is needed to take stock of what you just did. Let's say, for example, if you used a Quizlet or a Kahoot quiz or something like that. Yeah, it was different, it was novel, it looked good on the screen, but did it really improve learning? Did it improve engagement? And if it did, why did it? And did I use it in exactly the right way? Can I use it better? And I think it almost the use of technology in itself can almost be its own justification in itself, when actually you need the reflective practice, that period of critical reflection, in order to ask yourself quite critically, am I just using this tool, this technique, this technology for the sake of it, because I feel that's what I'm supposed to do, or in fact do I need to use it at all? And moreover, okay, if I can use it, fine, but what is the right way, the best way in order to use it? So I think that's why reflective practice is particularly key for delivering digital literacy learning.